Hello everybody and welcome to this video where I'm going to explain the quotations from the quotation wrap for power and conflict poetry. As you know, it's a closed book exam, so what I've done is I've taken one or two key quotations from every poem in the cluster, set them to music, and you can follow the link in the description to check out the wrap. And hopefully the plan is you can memorize those quotations really easily through the use of music. You don't have to like the wrap, you can take the quotations and set them to music yourself, do whatever you like with them, but I've chosen quotations which rhyme to help you to remember them. Now, it's no good just knowing the quotations though, you've got to know how to analyse them. So what I'm going to do in this video is explain my thinking behind the choosing of the quotations and give you some ideas on how you could analyse the quotations in the exams. The first was the line from My Last Duchess, "Will it please you sit and look at her?" Now, I love this quotation because it's got lots of different uses. To begin with, it establishes the dramatic monologue form. A dramatic monologue is a poem which contains a single person who gives a speech to someone else, which is evidenced through this quotation's use of the word you. However, the speaker is not the poet. So we know in this poem Robert Browning is writing as the Duke of Ferrara, and the listener is silent throughout. We never hear from the envoy. And what it means is that we're listening to a one-way conversation, and the dramatic monologue form is one which allows us to identify the speaker's character from what they say. And usually in this form of poetry, the reader works as a detective to analyse clues which reveal key details about the speaker, in this case the Duke of Ferrara. And there's a gap between what the speaker wants us to know and what the reader can read between the lines. So this quotation is a great quotation because the use of the word you establishes that it's a dramatic monologue. Also, it is an example of a line that is written in iambic pentameter, 10 syllables per line, with every other syllable being stressed. And the rhyme scheme, as you know, is also very tightly controlled in the poem. So the use of iambic pentameter throughout, coupled with the tightly controlled rhyme scheme, is a great device by the writer, because what it does is it reflects the tight control of the speaker, because the whole thing is about this guy who is controlling and asserts his power over women. There's also something to be said about the fact that this is a question. So what the Duke wants from the envoy is presented as a question: will it please you sit and look at her? And later he says, will it please you rise? But these aren't questions at all, they're demands. And the Duke frames his demands as questions, but we must make no mistake, this is a social superior demanding something from an inferior. He is a controlling character. So we see a lot we can write about with that one quotation, and that's why I chose it. For Kamikaze, a tuner, the Dark Prince, muscular. Now, considering this is a poem about a kamikaze pilot, it's interesting that the most powerful character in the poem is the tuna fish. The metaphor Dark Prince, the adjectives muscular and dangerous, create a threatening image. And there's a full stop at the end of this line, which this isn't the whole line, so you mustn't put a full stop after this quotation, because there's the word dangerous as well. But I didn't put that in the quotation here because it wouldn't rhyme else. But even the fact that this line at the end of it, when it comes, has a full stop of it at it, is the poet's way of saying stop and think about this. Now, despite the best efforts of the pilot, it's the tuna fish that's truly powerful. And this is natural imagery, the power of nature, just as we see in Ozymandias or the boat stealing episode where the mountain is so powerful, as we'll look at in a second. So perhaps the poet is suggesting that true power belongs to nature. Man's efforts are futile, and maybe it's that realization that causes the pilot to turn round and return home. There's much more to the world than he perceives. He looks at the beauty of nature and the power of nature, and he realizes he doesn't want to take away that experience from the hundreds of men he's about to kill. If you haven't checked out my video analysis of Kamikaze, do take a look at it, because the poet helped me with a couple of bits of information in the analysis, and it's really, really useful. Poppies, sellotape bandaged around my hand. Now, throughout the poem, we see lots of contrasting imagery where there is a blending of domestic and military language. So what's actually happening here is she's The mother has wrapped sellotape around her hand and she's sort of tapping the clothes of her son to just get the cat hair off. She's defluffing him. But the use of the word bandaged is a very clever word because it's a word or an image of suffering and wound. And we see that in the poem. The constant blending of domestic and military language shows how the conflict the mother experiences is the constant pull between normal life and concern and fear and worry about her son. It's in everything she sees and does. In Remains, sun stunned, sand smothered land. Try saying that quickly. It's a great quotation. It's sibilance, repeating the soft s sound 4 times, and Armitage does that to emphasise the significance of this line because the sibilance causes us to stop and look closely at it. But there are compound adjectives as well, which consist of positive images of sun and sand, but they're turned sinister through the adjoining words stunned and smothered. And this reflects how there's nothing positive left for the narrator. Everything he experiences is now tainted with the evil of war. The conflict in the words reflects the conflict experienced by the soldier. Storm on the island, the flung spray, and then I've missed a bit of the quotation, that's why I've got the ... the ellipsis, and carried on and looked down the line for where this sentence actually continues. The flung spray spits like a tame cat. Well, what have we got here? We've got a simile about the power of nature. Again, the power of nature often explored in these poems, but it's also a simile of unexpected attack, because you wouldn't expect a tame cat to spit at you. And it's a great image to do with nature, the power of nature, but also it underlines that sort of violence which we see throughout the poem. In Exposure, war lasts, rain soaks and clouds sag. Well, we've got sinister motives linked to the weather. It's as if the weather is deliberately attacking the soldiers. And of course it's pathetic fallacy where the setting reflects the characters themselves, the weather reflecting the awful situation the soldier is in. Extract from the Prelude, or as it is called, the Prelude, Stealing the Boat. This is one of my favourite quotations. Check out my video analysis of this poem, because wherever a poet writes something like this, a huge peak, black and huge, you think, what? Come on, you can use a different word. And it sounds funny in the rap. It sounds unnatural to have the same word. But the use of huge peak is really important, because before this, there was an ambitious and expressive vocabulary. But it's deserted the speaker. Only a few lines before, the imagistic simile like a swan suggested the grace and dignity of the boat, and now the poet is in such a state of shock that he regresses to a simplistic definition of what he sees before him, a huge peak. So the repetition of huge here, and we see the same thing with Ted Hughes with the repetition of raw in his poem, Bayonet Charge. The repetition of huge in a huge peak, black and huge, is suggesting that the poet's confidence, pride and even vocabulary has left him. All he's able to do is stutter and repeat himself. He's completely sort of destroyed emotionally and mentally by his recognition of the power of nature. Checking out my history, don't tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo. We've got the phonetic spelling, the words being written and spelt as they sound, of dem and bout, and that reflects the Caribbean accent of the speaker. But then the image of Lord Nelson and Waterloo as a symbol of British education and the sort of things this guy was taught. So this line contains the two conflicts in the poem, the real identity versus the forced identity of being a sort of taught in British education system. For the emigre, I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. This is a poem all about the power of place, that no matter how bad things are, your love for a place can overpower that. The place itself has power, and we see personification throughout the poem. So the city is sick, and then it comes to me, and then it lies down, and then it takes me dancing, and then I comb its hair and love its shining eyes is another example of the personification of the place, and it suggests a romance, a relationship, the place as lover. Ozymandias half sunk, a shattered visage lies, another one that's quite tricky to say. Just very negative language here, sunk and shattered, used to make it clear that the poem is an attack on the notion of power being eternal. Bayonet Charge, that amazingly powerful final line, his terror's touchy dynamite. It's a brutal line, having questioned what he's doing and why, the soldier runs out his terror's touchy dynamite. Despite his objections, the soldier's become a killing machine, and this alliterative metaphor perfectly sums up the danger he can potentially inflict upon others. In tissue might fly our lives like paper kites. We know that the title, tissue, the whole metaphor throughout the whole poem is about the fact that very much like thin paper, which tissue is and which humans are made of, the human power is fragile like tissue. So the whole metaphor of the poem is about power and human power being as fragile as tissue paper. And this quotation contains a reference to paper. The metaphor of receipts flying our lives like paper kites suggests that money dominates us, it controls us, and it has power over us. But they are fragile. Receipts and paper kites are fragile, and therefore we should question the power they have. In London, the mind-forged manacles I hear. We have this repetition in stanza 2, in every, which builds up to this line, the final line in stanza 2. What is it the speaker hears in all the cries and voices? It's the mind-forged manacles. And Blake imagines the mind as a forge, a blacksmith's workshop, where manacles are made. Manacles are like handcuffs. And for readers at the time the poem was written, the image is a very shocking one because they would have seen manacles on criminals and would have viewed them with horror. But the manacles are also a link, as I explain in the video on the poem, to the Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote in 1762, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." Now Blake in this line is agreeing with Rousseau that man's lack of freedom, his manacles, are mind-forged. They come from the ideas and outlook imposed on us by external authority. That external authority is the government of charters, as we've seen throughout the poem. War photographer, tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. We've got internal rhyme in this line of tears and beers. And the internal rhyme speeds up the pace, which reflects how quickly people forget about the horrors of war, which is what, of course, the whole poem is about. For Charge of the Light Brigade, I chose 2 quotations. Someone had blundered and rode the 600. Now, I haven't got time to go into it in this video, but if you look at my video analysis of Charge of the Light Brigade, I explain that most of the poem is written in dactylic dimeter, but not the line "someone had blundered." And the word blundered falls short of the metrical rule, as there's only one syllable after the first blun. Now clearly Tennyson's making a point. He wants to emphasise the blunder, by which he means the leadership error which led to this suicide mission taking place. And this is a subtle way in which the poet draws our attention to the mistake. The word blunder means stupid or careless mistake, and by deliberately breaking the rules of his chosen poetic structure on this word, Tennyson is subtly drawing the reader's attention to his disgust at the cause of the fatalities. He had to do it subtly because he was a poet laureate at the time, but it's there. And we have these dactyls which create the sense of the horses galloping forwards, but this line shortened, which mirrors how the soldiers' lives will also be shortened. I hope you found this useful, guys, and please do subscribe to the channel. Check out my ebooks at mrbruff.com on the GCSE English Language and Literature Guide, and have a good day.